Hey guys, the following is an interview of my good friend James Nash. I love this interview. One of my favorites I've done in a very long time. The way I'm going to introduce James is to introduce you also to a concept called Shoshin. Something that probably none of you guys know is back when I was 20, I spent some time living on a Buddhist monastery, and this is a Japanese concept. Let me just read the Wikipedia definition to you. Shoshin is a concept from Zen Buddhism meaning beginner's mind. It refers to having an attitude of openness, eagerness, and lack of preconceptions when studying, even at an advanced level, just as a beginner would. The best hunters I know walking this earth today embrace this concept. They are continuing to learn, and they look at every opportunity in the field as an opportunity to improve their skill set as a hunter. They go out of their way to look for knowledge and look beyond their preconceived notions. James is the epitome of this. So guys, listen to this interview as we go through several different topics in the hunting world. Some of these are controversial. We talk a lot about shot placement. We talk about James' recent experience in Australia where they shot a bunch of water buffalo, they shot a bunch of pigs, and they analyzed every shot for shot placement. We talk about the details of the stock, the details of the wind, all these little nitty-gritty things that James, who is a very experienced hunter, guide, outfitter here in the US, he went there with the beginner's mind. He soaked in those details to help him and his skill set, getting the most value of his time in those experience, in those repetitions as a hunter. Guys, this is a phenomenal interview with some takeaways for any hunter from beginner to advanced. Let's dive right into it. Guys, biltong, okay? I have been obsessed with this stuff for 3 or 4 years. Ever since I got on a keto, carnivore, paleo-esque type of diet, I've had a hard time finding healthy snacks. Biltong is a great option, particularly the slabs that have this fat on the side. That's where your energy is if you're a fat burner like me. Super simple ingredients in this, guys. Literally 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ingredients. Compare that to your gas station jerky. A great snack in the backcountry or just day to day. Biltong Depot is a huge supporter of my content. Go to their website, biltongdepot.com. Use my discount code CLIFFG, CLIFFG for 15% off at checkout and to support this content. Thanks, guys. James, awesome to have you back in the US, man.
Thank you, sir.
I'm happy to have my friend back in the US, but I would be very, very, being dishonest if I didn't say I wish I was with you, dude. And I
I
was
wish
lit.
you'd I wish you'd been there too, man. I so wish that you would have been there. Yeah. Look,
We
like
Go ahead.
those experiences are so incredible, right? And the only thing that can make them better is if you have your hunting buddies with you, right? And
Sure.
it's a different deal to roll on your own and kind of be the only entity from your own tribe, from your own crowd that's out there.
Yeah. Which also like has got to make it somewhat special too, right? You know what I mean? Like actually when you described it to me, James, and I guess for the listeners, go ahead and describe people what you just did, just so they kind of get some context.
I just spent 3.5 weeks traveling to northern Australia and then hunting and overlanding my way through the northern part and northeastern part of the country and then came home. And I was mostly bow hunting, although a couple different weapons came into play at different times. And yeah, I just had an incredible experience. So it was initially it was a pig hunt that I'd won on a raffle ticket through Blood Origins. And just in talking with folks and trying to make the most of what is already a long distance to travel, I ended up being able to add a water buffalo hunt. And furthermore, another buddy came and picked me up, Benny Solaris, and we got to go hunt axis deer and pigs in a totally different part of the country. So I got 3 different hunting locations and a huge number of miles in between.
Right. Dude, and it's funny, James, because you called them buddies, and I'm assuming, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but these are people you just interacted with through social media before going there, right?
100%. Had never met
Yeah.
any of these people face to face before, but I had met people face to face that were like friends of, right?
Sure.
Just through trade shows and stuff. I first started talking about, like seriously talking about doing this water buffalo hunt with Craig Hales, who's an Australian. He hosts the Bowhunting Down Under podcast, at the ATA show in 2017.
Okay.
Me and him and Cody Rich were sitting down together talking about like what people hunt in Australia, and he was trying to talk me into hunting sandbar uh, in Victoria. I was like, man, if I'm coming to Australia, I'm hunting freaking water buffalo, dude.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Like
yeah,
that's on your list. Because I know
yeah.
I know you're a big fan when you were able to hunt Cape Buffalo. That was like one of your favorite, right?
Huge, huge.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah. So now I've got 2 buffalo.
That's awesome, man. But it's really interesting to me that how you can do this in the hunting world, James. And I think like
Mm.
one awesome title for this episode might be, the art of the hunting bender, or the art of the hunting and fishing bender, because that's what I call it, man. Like there's some people figure out how to do this, and I think that social media has allowed it. Anywhere you want to go, if you spend time talking with people through social media, people are super inviting, man, and they want, and I'm the same way. I try to be the same way to people who come here from other countries too. Like I had New Zealanders work for me when I was outfitting and stuff for the same exact dynamic, right? They just reached out, they wanted to experience hunting here, and it's really cool that you can do that. And like, I guess it takes us. I mean, imagine 50 years ago trying to do it, man. It would have been way harder, you know?
So much harder. I mean, you're even less time ago than that. Like you've almost reduced it down to paper maps.
Right.
Which just isn't enough information to really go off of and be as effective as we are today. But no, I think you're right. I think hunters, we are gatekeepers and we want to hold on to our spots and we don't necessarily want to share that stuff with everybody. But we also do want to be generous with each other and be supportive of each other and help share the experiences that we're so passionate about ourselves. And sometimes it can be easier if you're traveling to a faraway place, right? So the place that I went to hunt axis deer, they call them chittle down there. So the place that I went to hunt chittle, the only reason Benny was able to take me there was because I wasn't Australian, right?
Yeah.
He, if I was Australian, he could not have taken me there. And he has lots of friends that he would love to take to that spot, but he just can't. There's like some social laws around that stuff.
Yeah,
But
I
there's
got you.
zero threat that I'm ever going to come back and try and step in on that property. So it was okay for him to do that. So
Right,
that's an
right.
example where I was actually able to get more access because of this distance.
Yeah, sure. And it was probably he probably felt it was an opportunity for him too, right? Like it was an opportunity for him to go hunt a spot that has a reason to do it, and all of that.
Yeah,
And
totally.
it's what's weird. I started to listen to a couple of your podcasts that you put out already, from your trip. And what's interesting to me is that I've noticed this when I've traveled to Canada too. You go there, people are willing to take you places that they've hunted once or twice, or maybe they haven't hunted it yet. And the thing you don't realize is when you're doing due diligence from a distance, you think that, oh, this guy's an Australian. He's hunted all over Australia a ton
Mm.
of times, right? Like he knows the whole. It would be like someone coming from Europe and coming here and hunting with me, and we were gonna go to North Carolina and go hunting, or go to Maine and go hunting. There's this assumption that I would have already done it, and it's a lot of times it's not the case. You know what I mean? It's kind of interesting. I think we tend to make a world that's not known to us seem like it's a lot smaller than it actually is. Because I mean, you guys are driving for days to hunting spots, right?
Dude, from where we hunted buffalo, well, I mean, let me just break down the travel a little bit.
Yeah, yeah,
It took
sure.
me 41 hours from when I left the sixth ranch here to when I landed in Darwin. 41 hours. And I never had a layover that was longer than 3 hours, right? Just a tremendous distance. And then it was an 11-hour drive, almost exclusively on dirt roads to where we hunted buffalo. Then from there to where we went to hunt pigs at Strathburn Station, it was a 38-hour drive that was almost all on dirt roads again, with river fords, rivers that had crocodiles in them. In that 38 hours, I never saw a town that I'd say had more than 150 people in it.
Right. That's wild, man. Like it's truly, truly remote. Had your host, had he been to all these places before?
So the place we hunted buffalo, he had not been to before. He'd hunted sort of like relatively nearby areas, which might mean still hours away, but
Sure.
he'd hunted in that region before.
Yeah, yeah. That's interesting because it's so much. I mean, it's kind of like back to what I said. It's like it's so much different than what you kind of see here. A lot of people are just hunting the same areas. You know what I mean? But they're, it's a different dynamic because of the distance, I suppose, man. But
These folks they're driving 6 hours to go to the grocery store.
yeah, it's wild. It's next level remoteness. The
Yeah.
people say. I mean, I used to call my old hunting lodge remote, James, and it was an hour and 15 from hour and 15 minutes from a Costco.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that's not remote, relative to
Your
this stuff.
rotisserie's still warm when
Yeah,
you get
yeah,
back,
yeah. It's like not
Yeah.
even in the same ballpark, but it's all relative to what people think. But I guess the obvious question, man, because I mean, just the logistics you laid out, what was it worth it, man? Was the trip worth it?
Oh yeah. Yeah, it definitely was. And look, this is a tough thing for me to pull off at the end of September and the beginning of October, right?
Right,
There almost couldn't be a less convenient time for me to uproot myself from everything that I have going on here and go to a different hemisphere, go to a different continent and stay for a prolonged period of time. But this was a goal of mine and it was an opportunity. And I've been working hard at saying yes to opportunities. And it's not an easy thing to do because we lived in a time where there is a huge amount of opportunity if you're just willing to look a little bit. And it was there. And I was like, okay, this is going to be a little bit painful, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to figure this out. And there's a risk in that as well because you think, well, since this is going to be expensive because it is going to cost me time because I'm going to miss the end of archery season and all of buck season, what does that do for me, from a business standpoint and, just from an enjoyment standpoint as well. And then the additional cost of the trip, it's like, gosh, am I really making a smart decision? With that extra pressure, you want the experience to match it, right?
right,
And you can also fall victim to some cognitive dissonance where no matter what happens, you'll convince yourself that it was worth it
right,
because that's just more comfortable. But I genuinely believe that it was truly an incredible adventure of the like that there's just not many left anymore.
right.
There's just not much left like this anymore. And Australia is so untapped. There's
Sure.
only 5,000 bow hunters there. There's only 5,000 bow hunters in Australia,
Right,
right? They have 6 or 7 deer species. They've got a pile of other like feral animals and they have no seasons and they have no limits throughout the entire country.
right. It's
That's
great.
freaking amazing.
Yeah, it's crazy, James. And I have to ask because I don't want to project my feelings about it on you and what your goals were. But when somebody describes a place like that to me, I think to myself, you know what? I'm pretty rusty on bow hunting. I've been guiding a lot of archers, but I haven't done a whole lot of killing stuff with my bow in a while. And that's just a function of my life, right? Like most archery season, I'm guiding. And I look at that and I'm like, huh, just from a practical standpoint, is to me a goal would be to go there and shoot as many things as possible for the sake of practice for the sake of like just iterating on it. You know what I mean? I don't learn anything well and I don't get anything set in stone unless I iterate on it a bunch. It would you is that one of the reasons you went? Do you think if somebody was going to go, that's a viable goal? Is that really realistic there, or is it kind of off track?
Yeah, for the pig hunting portion especially, that's a very viable goal because what they're doing there, the outfit was called Cayuga Adventures and it's on a place called Strathburn Station, 600,000 acres. It's a place of legend, right? Australian bow hunters have been going there to hunt boars since the 80s, and it's been guided professionally since the 90s. A lot of times by the very best guides and bow hunters on the continent, people who have more experience than you and I will ever get. Like Brad Smith, for example, this dude has seen between 3,000 and 5,000 animals die by archery. Like absolutely amazing. His amount of experience is phenomenal. So these pigs have been hunted by the best for lots and lots of little piggy generations over the
Yeah,
last
sure.
40 years. Okay. I think that'd be like 120 generations of pigs being hunted. So they're not your average pig. They're pretty smart. It's in a tough situation for stalking, but you're going to get multiple stalks a day. You are going to draw your bow every single day, probably more than once. And that's taking turns with another guy.
Right.
So not only do you get the experience of doing the stalk yourself, of all the ranging that needs to go on, of your shot sequence, of following up, like everything that's included in these little micro hunts, but you get a break from that and get to watch somebody else do that, and you get to analyze everything that they're doing in front of you, and think, okay, if I was him right now, where would I be putting my feet? When would I be using my rangefinder? When would I be drawing my bow? How long would I be at full draw? And then you're getting to sort of learn not only by experiencing but also by observing. So the
Right.
opportunity in that situation to really skill up as an archery hunter, phenomenal. I hadn't shot an animal with my bow since 2017 because I've been guiding every minute of archery season, right?
Sure.
I shoot a bow a lot, but shooting a bow and hunting with a bow are wildly different things.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, and I totally get that. And I want to dive into it, James. So I'm assuming that, having said what you just said, that these guys were good hunters, right? From your perspective. And just so the viewers know, like I put you up on the, high level spectrum on hunters in the US. So it's probably an unfair question, James, but are they better than Americans on average?
They have a very specific style of archery hunting. The guys that I was with have a very specific style, and that is going to be either blind stalking or spot and stalk, but mostly spot and stalk. And the stalking is in country where if that animal took the time to look, it would see you, right?
Okay.
You are visible, but you still have to figure out how to move into less than 30 yards. Uh, I stalked within 3 yards of pigs while I was there. I
Okay.
was within 40 yards of water buffalo many, many times, and I was inside 30 yards twice. The For that style, for that like sneaking up through the trees type of bow hunting style, I don't know if there's anybody better in the world than these guys. I think they're the
Right.
absolute best at it.
What was there any like key takeaways, man? Like, oh, I
Yeah.
guess one question, like, I want you to dive into the actual like techniques they were using in terms of the stock, like as nitty gritty as you can, James, and you can recall. But you also mentioned like your success getting close. Was that right off of the bat, or did you kind of pick up a couple things that helped you a little bit as you hunted there?
No, I dorked it up pretty bad a couple
I
of
got you.
times in a row.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I got it wrong. So I was learning uh I was learning in 3D as we were going along there. Yeah.
And like, what were some things you picked up, like
Yeah.
how they do stocks?
Okay. So from spotting the animal into 150 yards, they would walk in there like they were cruising across a golf course.
I
Very
got you.
leisurely, pretty fast paced. Uh, they're very comfortable talking as well, like above a whisper talking, even into that, like occasionally into like that 40-yard range. And I was freaked out. It's
You're
like,
like,
you need to be quiet. But they got away with it. They got
sure.
away with
Yeah.
it. So it's very possible that I've been thinking that I need to be a lot quieter with my voice than what I am, and that may be a disservice to the clients that I've had in the past. So I'm going to see what I can get away with talking wise in some of these future hunts. But
Sure.
so that's into 150 yards. We're just walking in there. From 150 to 100 yards, we're still kind of walking in, but you're sort of trying to put a tree between you and them. Um, Being very, very careful to only have your movement going forward, no sideways movement. Uh, the closer you get, the less sideways movement you can get away with. And if you think about, like, picture yourself driving down a road. If you see something walk into the lane in front of you, that movement is very detectable. If something moves in the brush off to the side of you, good luck, right? It might be an airplane crashing, and you could miss it because there's
Right.
so much movement over there. So if I'm moving directly towards you, that movement is magnitudes of order more difficult to pick up than if I move laterally. Okay, so we're moving straight towards them. At 100 yards, we're really starting to think about when to move, waiting for that animal's head to be down, waiting for them to be walking, waiting for them to be feeding, facing away, trying to get trees between you and them, or termite mounds were really helpful there at some times. And then we're moving in. At 50 yards is where it gets very real. So from their perspective, at 50 yards, now they're putting the client in front of them. Before that, I've just been following along. I stop when they stop, um, and I'm just a remote control hunter.
Mm-hmm.
At 50 yards, I'm moving around in front of them, and there was times uh, where Matt Moore, he would grab my pack, and he could either push or stop, because I might be looking down at my feet to try and navigate this absolute disaster zone of really dry leaves and
Yeah,
dry
noisy
grass.
stuff.
And if I'm looking at my feet and trying to make a movement and that bull's head comes up, Matt might grab my pack and stop me a little bit. So from a guide client standpoint, that was really helpful. Uh, and then as we get into that 40-yard threshold, that's where everything gets under a microscope. Going from 40 to 30 is exceptionally difficult. Getting to 40, very easy. Very easy. Can do it over and over again. As long as you've got the wind. There was never a time where we got visually busted by an animal. It was always the wind
Yeah.
if it blew up a stalk. So then at that 30-yard range, if we've made it that far, uh, you might not have your shot opportunity. And like on my water buffalo, I didn't. I needed to get to 25 yards in order to get to a place where I could create a shot window between the trees that was on his kill zone. Another thing about the stalking, and this was absolutely huge, and it's so fundamental, and I can't believe that I didn't know it. But the way to walk, if you're right-handed, is to push your left foot forward very slowly. And I would think about making my movements like the second hand on a clock. So that was about the speed that I was trying to move at. And that was everything, whether it was, knocking an arrow, grabbing my rangefinder, moving my legs, any of that, very, very slowly. I would also try,
What did you call it? What was the gauge you're using?
like the second hand on a clock.
Okay, gotcha. So
Yeah,
that's how you like visualize your speed. I
right.
get it.
Um, and it's something that we're all familiar with, and it's a constant speed. If you're going faster than that, then it should be fairly detectable.
Sure.
Tried to wait until there was times when the wind was blowing to create that movement in the limbs and trees so that I'm not the only thing moving. But I would move my left foot forward, and then rather than pushing my right foot past my left foot, I would just bring it up to match my right foot. Okay.
Okay.
So if my feet are both together and I'm facing towards the target, I can still shoot. If my left foot is forward, I can still shoot. If my right foot is forward and I've got my left hand on the grip of my bow and my right hand on the release, I am incredibly off balance and I can't stay in that position for very long. I start shaking and wobbling, and you can try this. I encourage you to, and grab hold of your bow or simulate grabbing your bow and see what that feels like. But if your right foot is forward and you're kind of crossed up and your torso is twisted a little bit to keep that bow towards the animal, and you're using the top limbs and cam of your bow to break up your face, which you should be. So I'm holding the bow in front of my body. Uh, that was that little shuffle, very effective. And I mean, I think it took me close to half an hour to move the last 10 or 15 yards on my buffalo. And it was in the sun and it was hot. The sand was burning through the soles of my boots. I was getting lit up by bugs. I had flies crawling up my nose. I had sweat rolling into my eyes. My arms were very tired from holding this bow up for that length of time. But you just have to be slow and make these little movements. And that left foot forward, right foot match, that was great. I highly encourage people to try that. If you're left-handed, switch it up. Right foot forward,
Yeah,
left foot up to match.
I got you. So you were never ending up in a right foot forward stance, basically,
Yeah,
right? And you're almost doing like half steps, but always leading with your left foot.
right. It's almost like a dance step.
I do very few endorsement deals and I do no paid reviews because it would affect the type of content, quality of the knowledge I could put out. So an important part of my business model is my membership group. I'll stick a link right here where you can sign up. There's paid and free options. I do a weekly live stream there. There is a thriving community of folks that are helping everybody become a better outdoorsman. It doesn't matter if you're a beginner or if you're an expert, there's something there for you. Go join, guys. It helps me out a ton. It's the way to support this content and to support me. I'll see you there.
And we hunted barefoot a lot, or in socks a lot. If we had to go through mud or something like that, you just like really hope that there wasn't a crocodile around, and you'd pull off your socks and wade through it. But a lot of times you could wear your socks, and that's good and quiet. You could also kind of shove your toes down into the ground and get them under the leaves a little bit, rather than trying to like scoot the leaves out of the way or softly, crunch them down. Just really doing everything that you could to limit that sound. And those are movements that are really hard to pull off in a pair of boots. They just are.
Sure.
Um, but because that sand was so hot and I was cooking, Maddie was like, "Hey, take your boots off," and I was like, "No, man, like I don't think I can," because it's 100 degrees or more, and that sand, who knows how
Oh, it's
hot it
too hot.
is. But yeah, I just don't. I think I would have like physically burned my feet had I done that.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, those are kind of some of the fundamentals. And then, another thing that they're really big on is range finding when you're at that 50-yard range. So you range the animal, and then you range all the trees in between you, and then maybe a couple trees that are past him in case he moves. And you're put in a situation there where you have to do some math, which I try my best to avoid at all costs.
Mm-hmm.
But um, I would basically be like, okay, if I can get to this tree, I'm at 25 yards. Um, and that tree might be off to the side a little bit. It's still going to work out. It's close enough. And then when you get to your shooting position, you don't have to have the additional movement and time task of reaching in, grabbing your rangefinder, ranging the animal, stowing your rangefinder, getting hold of your release, drawing your bow. Like you can go straight into drawing your bow because this is my 25-yard mark.
Right. Dude, it's so funny you bring up that point, James, and it makes so much sense. And I notice it, man. Like when I'm guiding somebody, and I do it too, even when I'm in archery setups on elk, I'll get ranges. I'll hit ranges before the bull's even there, and we let's say we know he's coming, right? You just like that he's gonna be there soon, so you get ranges real quick. A lot of times I won't imprint them in my brain, and I'll end up having to range again. It's such a
Yeah.
weird thing. Like I'll just brain fart on the ranges, and I say that I do that, and I do it, but clients are horrible at it. You know what I mean? Like the they, and I shouldn't say everybody, but I've noticed this. The bull comes in, and then we've already taken ranges, but now it's like, oh, before I draw my bow, I need to get one more range. It's super common. Like almost everybody does it, and it's always problematic. And so it's interesting that's not in the culture there. You don't do that.
Yeah. And by removing the option from yourself, uh, then it forces you to remember a little bit better.
Right.
And look, there's times that I forgot and had to rearrange on
Yeah,
stuff.
sure.
But the more I did it, the better I got at it. Just like you're talking about, those iterations, those repetitions, that stuff is how we build skill. So by doing it more often and doing it on, stalk after stalk after stalk, pretty soon it was a lot easier for me to remember. But I think that stress limits our ability to remember stuff like that. And an example is airplanes. I think just about everybody's had the experience of like walking down the tunnel to their airplane, looking at their seat number, and then they get on the airplane and they're like,
Oh yeah,
"What's my seat number now?"
dude, it's perfectly analogous. It's
Yeah,
the exact
yeah,
same. It's like I already looked at my ticket. Why am I quadruple checking? But you
yeah.
don't know. Like you've
Right.
blanked on the information. You don't have it, so you have to look. That's
And it's
interesting.
it's a low grade stressful situation, and it just limits our ability to remember something as simple as that.
Right. But if it becomes part of the process is like because it almost feels more essential. You know, that's how I would feel in your situation, James. Like I'm hunting with guys that's their domain and they're
Yeah.
like, this is how I would do it. After I screwed it up a couple times, I would start doing it that way. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Well, if you weren't allowed to look at your ticket when you got on the plane, you might look at it differently when you're,
Yeah, yeah.
walking down the jet bridge.
Yeah, you don't just like half-ass look at it. You
Yeah.
imprint it in your brain. No, I think it's a perfect analogy too, man. It's a good one. But there's a bunch in there, James. And I first starting when you first started talking, I'm embarrassed to say I've never thought about the straightforward thing. But when you were talking
Mm,
about it, I I was visualizing like you know the perfect analogy, James, is like if a bull elk is walking like right at you and
yep.
like you see it but your buddy doesn't see it, a lot of times they won't see it, you know, particularly if there's some distance. You'd be like, oh, it's right there, it's right there. And then they just, I can't see it, I can't see it. And the minute that bull starts to quarter or turns or whatever, it's like, oh, right there he is, right? And that's the dynamic you're talking about. If you're going like from this tree and then you go across over to this other tree as you're getting closer to the animal, you're giving them that same perspective, right? Like, that's I do. Maybe I'm super naive, and the listeners are going to be like, "Cliff's an idiot," but I never. That's never been a part of how I stock animals.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of this stuff is new to me too, man. Because it's not a style of hunting that I'm used to. I'm used to calling, I'm used to ambushing, I'm used to
Right,
spot and stalk with a rifle, but open country stalking with a bow, yeah, I haven't done that stuff since I was a kid. And
right.
I never killed anything then.
Yeah, yeah, sure. No.
Yeah.
I hear you. No, it's super interesting. The other one that you brought up, and do I become very biased on, is like the whole barefoot thing or
Mm,
like feeling your feet. You know, James, when I was guiding with you this year, and then when I guided these last rifle hunts I did, I was wearing these Jim Green barefoot style boots, and I've tried the whole sock thing. You know, stalking mule deer in socks, barefoot. I don't. I mean, I just don't do it just because really like the practicality of being up in the mountains and now I've got my one pair of socks or my one pair of three socks is now covered in stuff. I'm worried about stepping on crap or whatever. So I'll admit that that's part of the reason why I haven't done a whole lot of that. But man, wearing those like barefoot style boots with the thin soles, I could talk about it for an hour, and it'd be mostly positive with just some like obvious cons that are like I mean, you got an elk quarter on your back in barefoot boots, it sucks because there's like it
yeah.
sucks because there's no padding there and your feet are pushing down. So obviously that's a negative. But outside of that, man, I was blown away how much quieter I could be. And I was just like, I could consciously move around so much better. And then another part of that that's not related to this discussion is I was amazed, James, how much in fairly rugged terrain I was more comfortable. Like
Oh, yeah.
stuff that I would always side hill hard into, like with a real rigid boot. I'd get like where I was going across, like even if I was going downhill, like I'm tight switchbacking in really rough stuff. With those barefoot boots, dude, I would just go straight down like clown shoe it, like literally just, and I'd feel comfortable. So weird because it's like I feel like I was been sold like a total lie on boots or something. But anyways, on the stocking for sure, like what you're talking about is totally relevant.
Well, let me back you up on that because I wore barefoot boots, a lot during archery season this year. If I had a task like like when we're packing out that bear or whatever, and like there was real work to be done or real weight to put on my back, yeah, I was throwing on the nicks. But if I was trying to be stealthy, man, the barefoot boots were fantastic, and that's what I wore the whole time that I was in Australia. I didn't bring
Okay.
a backup pair of boots either. Like, and these things are light; they're like 8-ounce boots, and I was like, oh boy, I
Yeah,
hope
sure.
I hope these suckers hold up, and they did. And I think part of the reason is because you're a lot more careful with where you stomp your feet if you can feel the results of that. So
Yeah.
I also noticed that my back feels a lot better, and I like that.
Yeah, yeah, sure. I mean, it's probably just something to say just about like just the ergonomics of it, right?
Yeah,
It makes complete sense. And the other thing is you don't have like the normal just your feet when they're I mean I feel like a barefoot freaking boot commercial, man, but your feet feel like they've been in a cast
yeah.
when you're wearing like almost like mountaineer-esque boots all day. They're uncomfortable. So I there's an advantage I think too.
The Australians are barefoot uh, all the time. Like they're barefoot in restaurants, they're barefoot in gas stations, they're barefoot a lot of the places that they go. Matt's closest neighbor lives 3 hours away, 60 years old, and he's only owned and worn one pair of shoes in his life, and it was when he had to go to court.
Hmm.
Like people just live barefoot there. And looking at their feet is kind of an interesting deal because their feet are really spread out. They're splayed out. There's big gaps between each toe, and their feet are much wider. They've got a lot taller arch than we do, and yeah, that's just how they live. In all the time that I was stomping around barefoot there or in socks, I only hit thorns once, and a lot of
Yeah.
that country is sandy, so it's a pretty comfortable country to do it in. When I got back home, I was I was barefoot in my pickup and jumped out into this crushed rock in my driveway, and I was like, "Ouch!"
Yeah, yeah.
I'm still not there yet. But over there, yeah, I was only wearing boots if we're going out to hunt, and I was wearing a barefoot style boot to do it. So, yeah, man, I encourage people to check that out if they're trying to be a little bit quieter. I think that you know they'll surprise themselves.
Sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, for sure, man. And the other part of that, I want to dive a little bit deeper in, is you kept saying getting to 50 yards or getting to 60 yards or whatever wasn't too difficult. And then you're closing the gap to 30, 25 yards or so. Um, a lot of people are going to listen to this, James, and they're going to be like, why didn't you just shooting them at 60 yards?
Mm,
What's your take on that? And also I want to know your personal take, but also, what's their dynamic there on that?
yeah, they'll take a longer shot if they need to as a follow up shot, but they really want to be within 30 for that first shot. And Maddie told me on the buffalo, he's like, look, if you want to take a 40-yard shot and you're confident in it, go for it. And I think that people should hunt at about 60% of the range that in practice they hit every single time. So if you hit a kill shot every single time, and I'm talking 100 out of 100 times at 50 yards, that means as a hunter, you're probably a 30-yard shooter.
Yeah,
And that's the exact situation that I'm in. If I push beyond 50 yards, I don't hit that good clean kill shot every single time. I just don't. And,
right.
and that's on a 3D target. So I was limiting myself to 30 yards. Now, if I've got a critter that's wounded and he's standing out there and I can roll a sight to be able to get another arrow into him, I'm going to do that.
Sure.
But uh, I also get a lot of enjoyment out of being close to animals. I hunt really close range with a rifle. I've shot a
Right.
pile of stuff at archery range with a rifle, and I like that a lot. I love shooting long range with my bow. I love shooting long range with my rifles. But when I'm hunting, I want to be close. I like being close. Also, the water buffalo is the largest animal in Australia, and while they're not a Cape buffalo, they do kill a lot of people. They do, and they're very very capable of it. They're a huge animal. A lot of them have been hassled by mustering crews who are trying to catch them for live export. If you corner them, they can definitely get fired up. Or if you're doing a stalk and you're way out in the open and they see you, um, there's a real possibility that you're in trouble. Uh, then the last thing, man, I've got an honest, like, honestly, I've got hundreds of miles of blood trailing experience in my life.
Sure.
And if I can do anything to avoid that, I'm going to. The animals that I shot in Australia, I made good shots on. There wasn't a single one of them that lived more than 20 seconds after the shot. I made good shots, but I got close.
Right. Yeah, yeah. It's funny, James. Like I feel the exact same way about blood trailing. Like if you can avoid it, regardless of how much experience you have or whatever, that's the best avenue. It doesn't really matter how good you are at it. Once you enter that realm of things, if you do that enough, you're gonna lose animals, right? If you're blood trailing a whole lot for very much distance, there's like a ton of different reasons why you're losing animals. That's just part of it. And so it could be poor shots, could be like crazy vegetation, could be all sorts of things. You know what I mean? Could be in the U.S. private land boundaries or whatever. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense. If you can avoid it, do it.
Want to hear something else that's kind of wild that these guys do?
Yeah.
They all pack around sawzalls in their
Oh, okay.
backpacks, and on every single animal that they recover, they do an autopsy on it to show the hunter and themselves exactly where that arrow went. So
Yeah.
there's no question, there's no guessing of like, oh, that's a double lung shot. Well, which part of the lungs? Or was it actually a double lung? Did it go through the mediastinum, or did it go through the little lobes of the lungs and the diaphragm, and then through the little lobes on the other side? Um, you know, they're actually cutting off that shoulder, cutting through the ribs, pulling the ribs back, and looking at that kill zone. And then you lay the shoulder back on, and you take it off, and you lay it back on, and you start to burn into your mind what is actually going on inside that animal. And dude, it's very interesting. It's very interesting, and that's with an animal that's laying on his side, not hung up, right? It's something that I've never done before, and I've cut up, I mean, like 150,000 pounds of elk, and I've never done that before.
Yeah,
So
but yeah, it's funny for me to hear you say that, James, because I view you as like of all the people I know, like very much a student of anatomy and shot placement, and my experience with you have a pretty unique data set in the U.S. where you get to see a lot of archery shot bulls, so it's interesting to hear that from you because I already feel like you're very much like top tier on that. What I guess like I'm totally into these big data sets, and these guys obviously have a big data set, and you got to see some of that when you're out there. Were there any surprises, anything that changed your mind about? And then also, is there any big differences on the anatomy of that game versus elk, or do you have kind of the similar challenges?
I think the anatomy is ultimately very similar. It's very similar.
Right.
And whether you're talking about, you know, chittle or pigs or buffalo, um, they're they're all bovines, right? They're cloven hooved animals, and their anatomy is relatively similar. I think one of the big things I noticed, just as like an immediate takeaway, is one of the pigs that I killed. We cut open, and he was lying on his right side, so his left side was up, and from there, the stomach touches the diaphragm and then the lungs. So if you were to go on that hog, which was a big bore hog, if you were to go to the crease, the dreaded crease behind the shoulder that a lot of folks aim at or aim behind,
Mm-hmm.
2 inches back from the crease at that 1/3 of the way up the body level that we like to shoot at, you're straight into the stomach.
Yeah.
Like the liver isn't there. If you go to the other side of the animal, the liver is there, but on that left side, it's not. So that was something that I'd never realized before. One of the animals that a guy that I was with shot, he hit high and back, which, to look at it, you'd think it was a banger shot, but he went through the little lobes of both lungs. And it was that shot that I was just describing where he went in. It was a great broadside shot, went into that little lobe that's at the high back point of the lungs. It pierced the diaphragm again, and the liver, uh, and then through that little lobe on the far side, and got a pass through. That hog went like 290 yards, and it wasn't a great blood trail.
Right.
We found him, and found him pretty quickly, uh, but that's a double lung shot,
Sure.
but
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
not the same as a double lung shot that goes through the mediastinum. And increasingly, I think that is the real goal. And for people that don't know what I'm talking about, there's an organ that separates the two lungs called the mediastinum, and it's like a wall, and it looks white. And it connects to the spine at the top, to the sternum at the bottom, and to the diaphragm at the back. It also houses the aorta, the heart, the pulmonary, and then that other massive artery that runs up through the spine that I can't remember. But if you get your arrow through that mediastinum, you will have cut through the important parts of two lungs. And that animal is going to die in less than 20 seconds, or at least be unconscious and bleeding out. It's going to be over. It's not going to go far.
Right.
So I think that I want people to start thinking about the mediastinum a lot more and figure out where it is, because those lungs really cut back, around that stomach cavity, and around the liver and the stomach. And if you think of the profiled lungs
You're
from a
saying like they kind of wing back around the
yeah
guts. Yeah, yeah,
yeah
sure.
they're concave.
Right.
So if you were looking from the top down, it would be this big dome shape. If you look at lungs from a two-dimensional standpoint, then it's deceiving about which part of the lungs are actually valuable for you to hit.
Right.
Um, so what it came down to for them was the same thing as it is for us. You go straight up the leg, a third of the way up the body, get a broadside shot, and let her rip. Where it gets challenging for these guys is a lot of times they're shooting at bedded pigs where half their body might be submerged in the sand or the mud.
Hmm.
So you might have to shoot through the dirt line in order to get into the vitals of that animal. You might be shooting through the spine. You might be shooting, up through the sternum, depending on how that pig is laying. And they really have to think about stuff in a three-dimensional way more than we ever do.
Right. Yeah, just because that's like an added challenge to it. And then also, I'm assuming that, a lot of these situations, just the reality of it is that, yeah, I mean, I don't know about, this particular Australia deal, but like I've been, places where they want to kill a bunch of pigs in Texas. And it's not like, hey, let's wait for another opportunity. It's like, let's try our best to kill this thing right now because we're trying to kill 50 today or whatever, right? There's an element of like where they're gonna take shots where it's like, okay, there's this extra challenge, figure it out and take the shot. And I think that that probably makes you just so much better at judging the anatomy. But it's interesting, James, like what you're talking about. And I can't, like, I get a lot of messages this time of year from guys on elk that always describe like the same thing. And me and you talked about it. I had one of these situations this year too, where it's just like you're dumbfounded, right? You're dumbfounded at what happened. And what I've started to realize is the dynamic you're talking about, I think, explains 95% of these situations. Generally, you're one lunging an animal, and the exit is not where you thought it was, or like where the projectile exited is not. You could be way far off from what you think it is. I feel like all of these scenarios where I get an email like, oh, we've been looking for this bull, he fell down, we thought he was dead, we celebrated, we went over there, he was gone. Or it's like we got a perfect video of the shot going in there, like he's got to be dead, we don't know why, it was a bullet failure or broadhead failure, like all these like explanations that I'm not saying aren't possible, but the dynamic you're talking about is way more probable, I think. You know what I mean? And it's just not understanding where the projectile has to go. And I will say, James, like And tell me if you disagree with this. I have noticed with a rifle that probably just because of the wound channel and just the transfer of energy and everything else, that if I have somebody shoot a bull that's quartering two and gets an exit basically out the guts, a lot of times the bull will be dead in like 20 yards, like just laying there. And the thing is like a lot of those bulls, we never even look because we're just gutless method quartering them. So you like
Yep.
see, you don't even open up the guts. Like maybe you kind of like you just don't see it. But there's, I mean, I know of one bull that I guided this year with a rifle that I know was gut shot on one side and he was dead in 20 yards. You know what I mean? And if that same shot would have occurred with an arrow, I don't think we would have ever found him. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Do you
Yeah.
have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. I mean, a bullet is a more lethal projectile, right?
Yeah,
There's no doubt about that. Because it's doing a few things that an arrow can't do. And one of the big ones, man, is that as it goes into that lung, it can introduce air into the space, that pleural space between the lung and the rib cage, and that'll cause that lung to collapse, right? Um,
right.
and then you get this hydrostatic shock as long as your bullet's fast and you're close enough that goes through that animal. And I think that what happens a lot of times with elk is that and deer and other critters, but I think that hydrostatic shock actually causes an animal to faint and then they bleed out while they're unconscious.
Yeah. Dude, it's funny you say that, James, because like you mentioned this pig being 300 yards, and there's going to be people that are like, "Oh, that's like, well, that happens." It's like, nah, dude, 300 yards. You take certain species and certain vegetation, and you're not going to find them.
Oh
You
yeah.
know what I mean? Like that 300 yards is too far in my mind. Like I've lost bears that I've guided that were 200 yards away, and I just could not. No blood, like shit so thick. I had to be down on my knees to try to get through it, and you just can't find them. You know, and the reason I bring that up is I think it's the dynamic you're talking about. There is value in the fact that like you hit them with a rifle, they get knocked down, and it's almost like that same damage. If they didn't get knocked down, they could have sprinted 300 yards and died, and that could be the difference between finding them and not. You know,
Yep.
it's interesting because it's almost like it does matter, but it doesn't seem like it would. You know.
After 150 yards, man, the odds of recovery, like they go down a lot.
Oh
Like
yeah,
they go down a ton.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And then depending on vegetation and everything else, it makes a big difference too. You know.
Something else that has kind of been coming to mind for me that's bothering me a little bit about this after this trip, because I saw so many animals die so quickly, right? So quickly. I think that this standard of, you shoot something with a bow, you wait for an hour. Um, I think that there's a lot of falsehood in that, because I see it as a little bit different scenario now. And I've been guiding for 24 years now. Like I've got a pile of experience,
Sure.
and I'm still like constantly reconsidering. But I think that they're either going to be dead in under a minute, like really quickly, and it's going to be less than 150 yards, or an hour probably isn't enough. It probably isn't enough. So I'm really rethinking the way I'm going to approach archery shots in the future. And I think that if if we don't find them dead really quickly, we need to pull back for several hours.
Yeah. It is that is that kind of the policy there, or is that just something you've kind of put together from what you've been exposed to?
No, that's just me thinking about like all the situations that I've been in, with clients, and the bulls that I've bumped that are an hour and a half after the shot and things like
Mm-hmm.
that. Uh, you know, and and like some of these one lunger bulls that I've been there when they died, and I know it's about 2 hours later, or in some cases, I found one that I know had just died because he wasn't riggered yet, And that was 5 hours after the shot. So I think, he died in that like 4 to 4.5 hour time frame.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, I kind of am thinking that the standard wait 1 hour thing, it's probably not the move. I think that if you made a cracker shot on them, they're going to be dead right there, and you can go over there and get straight to work. However, if you did not, you might need to wait quite a bit longer.
Yeah, and and the thing is that's interesting about that, James, is I think it's like from a dorky statistical side of things, and like getting a biased data set. People always talk about, oh yeah, like I bumped this bull, I bumped this buck, and we ended up losing it. I think there's a whole lot of other ones that they don't realize they bumped. You know what
Oh
I mean?
yeah.
It's interesting, like because I notice when elk have a certain level, elk and other species too, it's not just necessarily them, but if they have a certain level of consciousness where they're afraid, but they have it together enough that they know to be quiet, it's stunning to me how quiet a bull can be. And I think there's for sure moments where they're strucken with terror and you bump them and they jump up and they crash through the woods like crazy. I think there's other times they hear you from 500 yards away and they get up and they walk out of there as quiet as they can. And they might, they may be dead on their feet, but they have enough mind capacity to be like, I need to be quiet now. And they just mosey out of there and you never find them, you know?
I agree with you.
And that's unfortunate because you don't ever get that feedback, right? You're just kind of like, oh, they're gone. And I wonder, when I reflect on animals I've lost, I wonder how many of them was that situation. Like at some point during this long drawn out process, did that animal just get up and move a mile? And that's the end of it, right? You're not gonna find there's your variables go off the charts, you know.
Yep. Yep. No, I mean, if they go half a mile, the the distance that you have to cover, especially if it's like tightly vegetative country, the distance you have to cover to grid out all the possibilities within like a 90-degree arc, which is being pretty conservative. I mean, you can easily put on 50 miles just gridding out that zone if you can only see 10 yards,
Right.
and who's got the guts to do that? And then, the clock is ticking. You've got like 12 hours on a bull elk before that meat's not recoverable. That's another reality.
Yeah, and then you're shed hunting,
Yep.
right? I mean that's just the reality of it is you got to find them during that period of time where that is what it is, you know.
Yep.
Um, so yeah, it's super interesting, and that would be another part of doing a trip like that would be so much fun, James. Just like the iteration on that component of it. I get it every year, but yeah, I get it over a long period, and you got to relearn a little bit if it's just every fall. So it's kind of cool to get some iteration on that. Now I wouldn't be doing the discussion on this particular topic justice if we didn't talk about what they're using, James.
Mm.
Like broadhead stuff. I know we had talked about it a little bit on arrow weight and that sort of thing. Like you adjusted your setup a little bit to what they suggested. Any thoughts on that, or tell us what's used there. Guys, I've been using onX Maps for almost 2 decades now, hunting, guiding, outfitting. It is the gold standard tool when it comes to mapping software in the hunting world. They've been a huge supporter of my content for multiple years, so if you want to support me and you want to support them, use my code CliffG for 20% off at onxmaps.com. It is an awesome tool that I use all the time when I'm preparing for hunts, and I use it almost every single day in the field. For navigation, knowing unit boundaries, knowing private land boundaries, it is the tool you have to have.
Yeah. It's all two blades, or two blades with bleeders, but basically all two blades, and then primarily single bevel. So a lot of what guys are using there are Cayuga pilot cuts, and that's a broadhead that I've shot for many years, and it's a broadhead that I've never had fail. It's a single piece of metal, no moving parts. It's 440 stainless with some additives in it that make it really hard. I shot 4 animals with the same broadhead while I was there, and just touched it up with with a sharpening steel in between. It's the type of broadhead that you will have until you lose it, you know. And
Yeah.
some of these guys are killing, 20 or 30 animals with the same broadhead. They're just
And
absolutely amazing.
the pilot cut, is that the shape, James?
That's the shape.
Looks like a
Yeah,
little airplane kind of.
it does. So there, it's kind of a play on words there because it does look like an airplane in that the back half of it has a lot wider aspect ratio than the front half. The front half is that good 1-to-3 aspect ratio that's great for penetration, and then the back half gets you your cutting radius. But pilot cut also from like when you're drilling a hole. If you're
Mm-hmm.
drilling a hole in something hard, you do it with a little drill bit first and then a big drill bit, and it's substantially easier, right? That's how
Yeah.
we do business. So the broadhead does the same thing, and because it's single bevel, because it's got some ramps on it in the ferrule, it does break bone really well, and their recovery on the single bevel is about 70% better on wounded animals than it is on the double bevel broadheads. Not something that I experienced there. That's just something that Brad told me, and I trust that guy with anything besides a beer.
Yeah. What what's the explanation for that? Is it bone breaking or what is it?
Probably how it cuts, because it's a little bit tougher edge and it's able to retain that edge after it goes through muddy hair, hide, bone, etc. A single bevel is just a tougher edge. Everything that we use in a wood shop is single bevel, right? If you
Yeah.
think about the a chisel or
Planes,
the
everything.
planes, if you look at a circular saw, that's just a bunch of single bevel cuts going around.
Mm-hmm.
If you go down to watch somebody make some nice sushi, they're probably using a single bevel knife to do that. Uh, it's very sharp and it maintains its sharpness really well because it's got a good foundation to hold on to that strength. And a sharp cut is going to bleed a lot more than a dull cut. So if I take a digger off of a bicycle and I scuff up my elbow, it bleeds for a minute and then it clots up very quickly, right? But there's a lot of damage to that area. If I nick myself with a razor, it bleeds forever.
Right.
It's a lot less damage, but because it's less damage due to it being sharper, then the body sends fewer clotting agents to that area. So keeping your broadhead sharp when it's inside of that animal's body is absolutely critical to getting good bleeding. And that's the way an arrow kills something, is through bleeding.
Right, right. Just slicing stuff up.
Yep. Exsanguination.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And what I don't understand, James, and I could be totally talking out of my ass right now. All the guys that are, because the single bevels are very clearly a trend in the U.S. now too. And I'm sure part of that is like effectiveness, part of it is marketing, whatever, right? Doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is that I don't see studies of XYZ single bevel heavy broadhead guy in the US taking 500 of his broadheads and giving them to a Texan and saying, "Hey, go out and shoot 200 pigs with these things and do the results." Do those studies exist, or I guess it's just a curiosity of mine why people aren't doing that. It sounds like these guys, they're lucky because they do this type of hunting where they're exposed to a lot, and then they also make broadheads, right? The guys you were hunting with.
Mm-hmm.
But in my mind, I'm like, why aren't people doing that just to get to the brass tacks of like what works best? Because and I guess where I'm going with this a little bit is the shape, this like the pilot cut you're talking about. It's different than what you see from like the Iron Will guys, from Grizzly Stick or whatever. And I have no idea if it matters either, James. I'm just curious, like I'm curious why everybody hasn't come to the same shape, and then instead of marketing on this shape or that shape or whatever, they're marketing on the same thing the knife guys do, right? Like the quality of the steel or like whatever, those little nitty gritty details. Why I can lay all these broadheads in front of me in the U.S. and they all look drastically different. It's I guess it's stunning to me, and I don't know that you have an answer to this, but do you have thoughts on that?
I think it's because there's multiple shapes that work.
Yeah, I
You
got
know,
you.
if you go to, if you look at the arrowheads that natives used in our area, the Columbia Plateau head, it was almost a pilot cut.
Yeah, I
It
gotcha.
had a long narrow tip, and then came into a wide point. If you get into Africa, it's a lot more spoon shaped tips, which are going to be more consistent with what like grizzly stick and stuff is doing. I think that there's a lot of shapes that work, and almost anything will work on a good shot. It's like what's
Yeah,
going to work on a bad shot. What's going to work if you have to shoot through a limb on the way there, or several limbs. I had to do some pretty significant landscaping in order to get to some of these animals,
sure.
but it worked great, and it was because I had an arrow and a broadhead that was ready to keep flying straight despite some minor inconveniences like limbs.
Right. No, I gotcha. Yeah, that makes
Yeah,
sense, man. Maybe like I'm drawing the conclusion that they're not all coming to the right or to the same shape because they're not testing them or whatever, but it could just be that they're all effective in a similar way. You know what I mean? Or they
there for sure is a most effective shape. There for sure is. I don't know if it exists yet, uh, but there's enough that work that I think that's where the marketing shows up, and people are trying to present something that's a little bit different than from what the other guy's doing. But there's a lot of
yeah.
them out there that work.
Yeah, yeah, no, and
Um,
that makes sense.
yeah, I can say that I've talked to a bunch of Texans that were like, well, you can't get a pass through on a pig if you're shooting through both fighting shields on a big boar. Um, I never saw a pig stop an arrow while I was down there.
Yeah.
So these these things drive.
Yeah, yeah, they
Um,
go.
yeah. Another thing they were doing, man, is they had a pressure tester. So they'd cut the fighting sheet, the fighting pad off of a boar, and
Okay.
then you could put different broadheads on, and then see how many pounds of force it took to push your broadhead through that fighting pad. And that was really interesting as well to see what it took with different broadheads.
So these guys are doing like a little testing while you're out there.
Oh yeah,
Oh, okay. I
yeah,
gotcha.
yeah.
And do they have like new ones they're working on, or is just they're just kind of collecting data?
Yeah, and they're showing you some competitor broadheads and stuff like that
Yeah, yeah,
too.
yeah, sure. Yep,
But
yep, yep.
also it's interesting. Like the pilot cut, for example, took 12 pounds of force. It's not much.
Right.
So maybe you can get away with a little bit less draw weight. Another thing they kind of talked a lot about with draw weight is your max draw weight is the maximum amount that you can let down easily. And
Oh,
you know
sure.
i'm I'm big on people practicing letting down, because I think that that's another contributor to wounding is people pull back their bow, they know that letting it down is a bad experience, so they psychologically commit to the situation regardless of what has changed,
Right.
and then they take shots that rationally they know they shouldn't.
Yeah. Dude, it's so funny, James. I was talking to a guy yesterday about this. I was on a podcast, and this exact same topic came up. And I feel the exact same way. And I feel there's an analogous situation in rifles, too. Like, if you
Mm,
get, a lot of times you get a guy or a gal who, may be new to hunting, may not, but they've got buck fever going like bad. You know what I mean? But and they're having a hard time getting a rest, and they're fiddling around, and the animal's giving them all the time in the world, but they're committed to shooting, and it's taken them so long, and I view that as like it's kind of like being drawn, right? Like their adrenaline is like so off the charts that they'll shoot, and I'll ask them, how'd the shot feel, and they'll be like, oh, I wish I wouldn't have shot. And it's the
yeah,
same dynamic. If a guy has got his bow drawn for 45 seconds, he'll do absurd shit.
yeah,
You know what I mean? And it's such a weird dynamic, and that makes sense though, man. Like, so you want it to be where you can basically controlled drop your draw.
yeah, because then it's not a scary experience. So if
Right.
that situation dissolves, you're not just going to fling to get it over with, like get me out
Yeah.
of this, like let's just get this
Yeah.
arrow off the string because I'm in a bad place right here, and I don't want these radical cams to rip my shoulder out of the socket as I try to let this bow down. you might be overdrawn if that's the way that you're living.
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sure. And the thing is, man, is like I notice on elk, James, a lot of times elk in certain vegetation, you can draw multiple times on them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like if they're really looking for something and that you're set up right where they're not looking for you, they're looking at somewhere else, somebody else calling or whatever. A lot of times you can draw twice on them. You know what I mean?
And I think for every one successful harvest that somebody has on a bull elk, they probably have at least 3 times that they drew and had to let down.
Yeah, they
And
should.
it's something that they probably didn't ever practice. They might have
Right.
taken 10,000 shots that summer, but they probably didn't practice letting their bow down a single time. They launched it off the string every single time. And that's just not reality. So I think we need to be practicing letting down and building up those muscles and building up the confidence that we can do it without shaking the arrow around and rattling it against the riser. If you can do it slow, take a breath, and then when that bull clears the tree, draw back and send it.
Yeah, yeah. No, no, for
Yeah.
sure. Hey, I had a random thought, James, and I got to hear your opinion on it. Dude, and this may show you that some people that in the spectrum of archery that maybe I come across as very naive, but for years I was told that if you've got your bow drawn, and then if you like half drop your draw, that it's going to affect the speed of your arrow like significantly.
Mm.
And I had heard this for years. And sometimes like I've had it happen like I draw and I actually had it happen on pigs this year. I drew and then as I half drew, I kind of realized like oh, I need to stop for a second because they're like staring at me, but they're going right behind a log or whatever. And then as they go, I could I kind of let down a little bit and then I redrew, right? So like I like let the cam down a little bit and then redrew. And I
Mm.
always thought to myself, or I was always told, and I picked this up somewhere that oh, you never want to do that. You want to go full down and then redraw completely. So I was like, I gotta test this finally, and I chronographed my bow, and it makes no difference.
Yeah.
Not a foot per second difference.
Yeah.
Not, and I had this myth in my mind forever, dude.
Isn't
Like,
that fun?
yeah,
Yeah.
like dude. I mean, I've thought that since I was 12 years old. Like, and I've told people that, like, oh, you can't, if you drop it down, you can't you can't keep tension on the cams at all because when you pull back, it's gonna be a different speed, and it's complete bullshit. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And finally, I pulled out a chronograph, and I'm sure it's because the Garmin chronographs are freaking so easy to use now. I'm like, oh, I'll just stick this thing out here, and I did that 5 times. I'm like, I've been wrong. I've been wrong for half my life.
Yeah. No, I love stuff like that, man. And what a relief to be like, oh, I can let that go,
Yeah, yeah,
because
I
we
don't have
tested
to.
it.
Yeah, and I think about it all the time. It's really like a totally little idiosyncratic thing that rarely anybody has to deal with. But I just thought it was kind of a funny deal. But pretty, yeah, just one of those things, man. But James, are you tight on time, man?
I'm good.
You're good. I one thing that I wanted to ask you about is you know this is going to be kind of a goofy one, but you went out there and then you immediately went on like a long duration overlanding trip with somebody you didn't know. Um, were there any giant challenges to that? Because I mean, you're dealing with probably already 30, 40 hours of sleep deprivation, but was there any issues there?
I couldn't find an archery target to shoot, so
Yeah,
I was going in there pretty raw, and I went all over Darwin looking for a place that I could shoot my bow. There was nothing, nothing.
dude, that's
Uh,
crazy
there,
because I would never think that.
yeah, yeah. Uh, so yeah, we actually ended up stopping at one of Matt's buddies' houses, and I shot my bow there. And then when we got out to where we were hunting, I just shot some termite mounds and burned through them. And I even shot one with a broadhead to make sure my broadheads were still good, and just
Sure.
sharpened it up real quick and went off to the races. But yeah, there's definitely some fear of like, am I going to get along with this guy okay?
Yeah, sure.
Is this a dangerous situation? And yeah, I just kind of went with it, and knew that I would take care of myself and make the most of it, and it turned out, and everything was great. Um, and yeah, I mean, dude, that's a long time in a single cab pickup to
Yeah,
spend with anybody.
that's
Yeah,
exactly what I mean, that's basically what I was asking James. Like,
yeah,
it's like, oh wow, like that's a long time to be driving with somebody. You know what I mean? But you also probably get to know them really well. You know what I mean?
sure. And you're asking and answering so many questions about these two very different cultures, right? And Australian is its own language. Like I'm not for a second gonna let somebody tell me that's the same English that I speak, because it's not. So there's so many different words that mean different things, and every plant species and every animal species is something that flat out does not exist here. It just
Yeah,
doesn't. So the whole world down there is brand new to me. I might as well be on a different planet. So my curiosity about that natural world is insatiable. And all it takes is looking out the window at something I've never seen before and asking about it. And I'm good. I can keep doing
sure.
that forever. I'm interested. I want to know how it all works.
Yeah, you
So
can
yeah,
burn through time.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. What's the culture of hunting there, James?
Mm.
Because it's different, right? Like you said, like one like per capita, there's not near as many hunters, and then the resource is different. There's not this, I'm sure the North American model of wildlife management or whatever is not not a big tenet there, and they probably have a different perspective. Did you guys get into that at all?
Yeah.
What's the culture like?
So you're not hunting native animals at all. You are just hunting feral animals or introduced species. Uh, and it's very different. It's largely not about the meat, which
Right.
is a massive difference for us. Uh, and some of these animals are not good to eat. Some of them are dangerous to eat. Like pigs this time of year are primarily eating carrion. It's
Oh,
at the
okay.
end of their dry season, so they're mostly eating other dead animals. So it's flat out dangerous to eat that meat. Um, yeah, just
And
a
there's zero moral judgment about that, I assume.
yeah, certainly not within the hunting demographic. I imagine that there is outside of the hunting demographic. But man, a lot of the animals that they're hunting are stuff that we wouldn't consider hunting, like
Right.
feral cattle or camels or donkeys or horses. Stuff that just like isn't on our radar at all. To those folks, those are game animals, and they're feral animals that live in these remote places that are doing bad stuff to the native ecosystem, and they're just another game animal to hunt.
Sure. And then at the same time, anything native is off limits.
Totally, yeah.
Yeah, like including kangaroos are native, right?
Kangaroos are native. So the only hunting that occurs for kangaroos is for damage that's occurring on private land, and they need a permit from the government in order to do that. Bow hunting is a big deal because uh, guns are hard to come by, but not impossible. There's a lot of rifle hunting that goes on there. I hunted with a rifle for the axis while I was there. Also used a knife when I hunted pigs with dogs, which was great. Uh, but uh, but yeah, South Australia recently banned bow hunting. It's a ban that hasn't taken into effect yet, but next year in the state of South Australia, they're not going to be able to bow hunt anymore. So
And
it is a tenuous thing for them as well.
did you guys discuss that at all, James? Like why that happened? Was there specific reasons why, or what were the big talking points, I guess, of the anti-bow crowd there?
So it's not an anti-bow crowd. It actually wasn't even voted on. It just
Oh,
came
okay.
down to members in the government that just said this is how it's going to be now.
Huh. So
Yeah,
yeah, I got you. I'm unfamiliar with their process, so that just is what it is. Like we're no longer doing that. It's gone.
right. Yeah, not a vote. Just like there it goes. You're not bow hunting anymore.
Yeah, and that's it. And you can still can they? Is there no hunting period?
No, they can still rifle hunt. Yep. And
Huh.
yeah, but no more bow hunting. And there's pictures that have floated around of arrows sticking out of wounded animals and
Sure.
stuff like that. But yeah, ultimately it just came down to government saying this is how it's going to be, and because of the way their government is set up, then they just have to take it.
Yeah, yeah, it just is. It just is what it is. It's really interesting. And do they have any of the? Because I know anytime I talk to Kiwis, New Zealanders, they want to talk about this. Is there any big conflict between like culling and the guys that want to hunt?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of helicopter culling that goes on where they'll go out and kill thousands of animals with rifles, and of course there's a lot of wounding that occurs during those things, and it can be a little bit hard on people. And there was some big food shortages that occurred during COVID, and they still had these massive culling events where they could have found ways to go out and get that meat um, back into the population so that they had some protein for those folks. But yeah, there's definitely conflict between the government culling programs, shooting out of helicopters, and the hunters who really value these animals.
Yeah, that's. I mean, it's always an interesting dynamic because we don't. Well, I shouldn't say we don't deal with it here. We deal with it a little bit on some of like the non-native species, but it's just interesting how every culture's so different, and I think sometimes Americans, James, who haven't been exposed to other hunting cultures, they don't they don't realize that we have our own kind of oddities. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
um, for like the meat one's very interesting to me. Like in the U.S., the pressure to on any species or whatever to that to be a very just has to be a component of it. A lot of other places they think that's a very odd concept. You know what I mean? And they immediately drive into some hypocrisy that we don't talk about a lot here. Like, okay, well, it's interesting you say that, but what about coyotes or whatever? You know what I mean? You can go off into these
Hmm.
things that when I talk to people from other hunting cultures, it's like it's very apparent that yeah, they have a point. Like we have our oddities too within our culture and our norms and everything else. So I always think it's interesting to talk to guys about that. Um, one thing I ask every guest, James, is I usually ask them about, gear that's underrated or overrated, those sort of things. My viewership loves that stuff. But I'll ask it in the context of Australia, man. Is there any gear over there that those guys are using that you were like, wow, I might start using that?
Mm. You know, almost all of their gear is our gear, right?
Okay.
Yeah, they're primarily using stuff that is either produced here or American companies. Um, I
Because yeah, I
I
guess it makes sense because if there's only 4 or 5 thousand of them, they're basically exposed to our hunting. Our hunting
yeah,
industry is their hunting industry from a gear perspective.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I will say that the most valuable thing that I had there uh, was my stabilized binos.
Dude, I knew you were gonna say that.
Yeah, I mean
Did you did you hand them to them? They're like,
oh
hey,
yeah,
dude, can you leave these here?
yeah. They're like, can we get these? They'd never heard of SIG before. They're
Yeah,
like, can
yeah,
we become a distributor? I was like, well, there's already a distributor in Australia, but I don't know where you get them. Like, you're gonna have to figure that out. But yeah, I mean, everybody that sees those things is amazed. And um, yeah, if you're holding on to a bow and you want to take a closer look at something and like maybe see how that pig is laying down in the mud and like which way
yeah.
his head is, as he's in the shadow underneath a root wad in a bank, like, dude, it's just incredible. So yeah, that was my most valuable piece of gear. And then dude, I gotta give a nod to that little tripod that mounts onto the limbs of that Matthews Lift bow.
Oh, okay.
Little
Yeah.
folding tripod, and you can shoot with it on there. Dude, I loved that thing. And
Oh, like
I
the
don't ever
stand. The
yeah,
stand. Oh yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
I,
yeah. Oh
I don't
heck
ever
yeah.
want to have a bow without one of those again. Like,
Yeah.
it's so nice not to have to lay your bow down in the dirt, and you don't
Yeah.
ever have to bend over to pick it up, and you just set it there, and oh, I loved it. Like,
Yeah.
hats off to the folks that figured that out. Like,
Yeah,
kudos.
dude, it's funny you say that, James, because I have one on my Hoyt too. It's like whatever
Yeah.
model they have or whatever, and I get people ask me there because I don't ever fold it up. I don't do anything. I just leave it how it where I can
Oh
set my
yeah.
bow down. I don't mess with it. And I've had people be like, "Oh, like you don't take it off when you hunt, or you're like, doesn't it like affect your shot or balance or whatever?" And I'm thinking I always tell them like, "Well, it probably does a little bit, but I don't give a shit because just the value of being able to set it down and not always having to worry about like, well, how am I setting my strings across this or that or whatever." Like those things are awesome. I totally agree.
Yeah.
You know. My bow's for sure taking a few headers just because of the wind. Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
I set it in the wind and it'll not get knocked over on mine at least. But no, those are awesome, man. But and yeah, dude, the stabilized binoculars. I don't even know what to say about them, James.
It's
Like,
the way.
yeah, it just is what it is, dude. Because like in Alaska, dude, there's this I say kid because he basically was a kid, but he's a very experienced guide. But he's like 23 years old, and he's driving this boat behind me, and he's got a little he's driving the motor like this. I can't
Yeah,
remember
got a
the word.
tiller.
Yeah, he's got a tiller in his hand, and he's going across this lake, and the lake's choppy, and we're looking for bears, and he's got a pair of SIGs, dude, while he's hauling across the lake, and he's like, "Oh, there's a bear," and dude, it works.
Yeah.
Like you could glass out of a moving boat with them. You can glass out of a truck. I mean, they're phenomenal. And I get people that come to me, dude, and they're always giving me like some little tidbit of why they hate them, and I'm like, I get it, but like you have to look at the bigger picture here. Pun intended, man. They just
Yeah.
work.
Yeah.
But but no, those are
So,
awesome, dude. I appreciate your time, James. This was great, dude. I have a million other questions I'd love to talk to you about, but I'll get you on again, dude.
okay, sounds good. Thank you so
But
much. And
yeah, man.
it's fun to talk about this stuff while it's fresh. And um, I I hope people will take opportunities like this if they ever get the chance. And man, if you can ever put yourself in a scenario where you can go out and be doing lots of stalks and taking shots, like please do that. You will skill up in a week like it would take you a decade. Like it would take you a decade in the States to get the experience that I got in a week down there. Um,
Right.
and yeah, you might have to suffer some travel and some heat and various things in order to do it, but you're just going to skill up in ways that you can't imagine.
Right. And James, you brought it up, so I'm going to steal like 5 more minutes of your time. I think me and you have had personal discussions about this, and I think that sometimes maybe both of us, maybe just me, I think to myself like, these type of things. I haven't done Australia, but I'll go on these benders, these hunting or fishing benders. I've been gone for a month spearfishing or whatever for these exact same reasons, and I tend to think that I'm unique. And I think sometimes that's projected from other people. They're like, "Oh, James, it's so nice that you're able to take 25 days off and go to Australia. I could never do that, right?" I think what's lost in that, and I don't mean to, and I'm not trying to shit on people that have that perspective because I'm sure there's people that are listening to this that have this perspective, is you're making like massive financial and personal and everything else concessions to do that. Like the same thing, right? If you're an investment banker and you say I can't do that because I can't take 20 days off because it's going to cost me 100 grand or whatever I'm going to lose during that period of time. We're like in the same boat. You know what I mean? Maybe different numbers or whatever. That
Yeah,
doesn't matter.
for
But
sure
but
different
yeah,
numbers, but yeah.
different numbers. But it's not like it's everybody has the same challenges, dude. It's not easy to do it. So I guess my thought on it, at least, and I'd love to hear your perspective on it, is if you feel that way, but you feel like I'd really want to do that, or like, man, I'd like to do something like that 2 or 3 times in my life, you can figure it out. But just realize that James is had to go through the same, painful decision making process to go do this trip. So
Oh yeah. No, like it's so doable. It's so doable. And then the same thing talking to those guys down there, they're like, "Man, I wish I could just come out and hunt a whitetail. Like I just want to hunt a whitetail so bad."
you're
I'm like,
like,
"Why don't you just do that?"
yeah,
And they're like,
yeah,
"Well,
yeah,
well, can I? Like what would that look like?" And it's like, "Well, you get on a plane and you kind of do the opposite of what I just did, and you buy your tag and you go out and knock on a door and say, 'Hey, sir, I noticed you had some whitetail out here and some busted fence, and I've got my fence stretchers, and like next thing you know, you're doing the same thing as me and you're hunting whitetail deer. Like all
sure.
this stuff is doable. Uh, just ask around, be like, hey, I want to do this. What's it going to take? How do I do it? And people are going to help you. They're going to help you figure it out.
Yeah, yeah, and you'll figure out I mean, there's going to be trade offs, and you'll just kind of like get through that stuff. That's just part of the deal. So, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
no, I think it's nice to talk about it in the context, James, that it's not like unique. That I mean, I'm not like you know, like
Yeah.
you're a very unique person, James, but the ability to go do it is not unique to me, you, or other people who are doing it. Like anybody can do it. It just takes a little, just some planning and everything else. So,
Dude,
you
yeah,
know,
now is the opportunity. Now's the time. And like definitely do think about Australia because they have so many species that are open to you all year long. And yeah, there's a guy named Ben Solaris, one of the guys I hunted with, and he owns an outfit called Silent Pursuits. So if you want to hunt Australia, you just talk to him and he'll help you with the outfitters and the logistics and all that stuff. But there's a guy like him for any country, right?
yeah, of course.
Um, just reach out to those folks, and like there's professionals that can help you with this.
Yeah, yeah, sure. And then just on the economic front, James, do you mind like ballpark, like, I know that you won part of this, but like a trip like that, what would it cost? Like what's somebody facing?
So like if you take this pig hunting portion of it that I talked about the most, I think US dollars you're going to be in that like $3,500, probably $2,000 in flights, maybe $1,000 to $1,500 in in-country travel, and maybe an extra grand in like food and gifts and stuff like that, depending on how you're living while you're there.
Sure.
But all in, you're going to be substantially less than a Western elk or deer hunt.
Right. Yeah, yeah, for sure. And that's huge, man. Like if your goal is more oriented around becoming a better hunter, like this kind of stuff's no brainer. You know what I
Oh
mean?
yeah,
Like it's totally the way to go. Particularly, I feel like the current, I guess like just the supply and demand of a lot of the species in the U.S. It's expensive, you
yeah.
know. So there's a lot of opportunities, Australia and other places that I think people probably overlook,
Yeah.
So, but James, where can people follow you, man?
Six Ranch Outfitters on Instagram, Six Ranch Podcast, anywhere you listen to podcasts. But man, the biggest thing that I would encourage folks to do is just to keep watching your videos, man, because that's where I learn a lot of my stuff.
Thanks, dude. No, I appreciate it, man. I'm editing one big one right now on the ultimate guide to elk sign.
Oh,
Ah,
cool,
it should be fun.
cool.
Um,
I'm
but
fired up to watch that.
it's gonna be a long one.
Good, good.
But it's all good. But thanks a ton, James. I appreciate it, man.
Thank you, Cliff.
See you, dude. If you enjoyed this content, do me a huge favor. Subscribe on whatever platform you consume it on. Spotify, Apple, YouTube, whatever works for you guys. Everything else is on my website, pursuitwithcliff.com. Go there and it's going to be very apparent to you that I work my ass off just to not have a real job. All the hunts I guide, all the seminars I put on, all the unique experiences I offer, and the membership site, all the details are there.